Good evening. It is now June 2nd, 2020. And guess what? Great things are happening in our lives. And it's happening because we're alive to witness it. And we are able to change lives because we're alive and have a breath and a voice to speak. And our voice carries volumes. And don't ever let your voice become silent, because when you're silent, you're not only silencing yourself, but you're silencing your brother or your sister around you. Your voice enables someone else to have breath to breathe and to live. Your fulfillment of your dreams and your visions will always make the difference in someone's life. Your failure to do your dream or fulfill that vision that has been given unto you to make that impact or do that impartation, guess what happens? You fail your brothers and your sisters, and you stop them from moving forward to where they need to be. Welcome to another Coffee with the Bishop on this COVID-19, and we got some great guests that's going to be with us. Let me remind you, my favorite saying is, when your heart is right toward God, God is obligated to orchestrate every circumstance, situation, and event of your life. Certainly, He is to bring you into the company of the people you need to know that are crucial and critical for the fulfillment of your destiny and this predetermined, God-ordained impact that only you must make in this world. And guess what else? After you done checked your heart out really good, when it's your sincere desire to please God, guess what else happens with that? God is obligated to reverse your barren state supernaturally, even if He must create a miracle. That's right. And He will create that miracle. That means with clarity of vision, immediate acceleration toward the known goal. And so I'm on here today to say it's a great time to make some accelerations toward your known goal, not just sit back and do nothing, but be about something that's going to edify and encourage your neighbor. That's it. And let me start off by celebrating two great marches that took place in this weekend for us. None other than to say that Brother Brother Kasim Johnson had his march on yesterday, a peaceful march. They went from East Stroudsburg, Dansbury Park, all the way to the courthouse on off of Main Street in Stroudsburg without any issues. And it was a great march, and the young people participated, and they spoke with a voice that united the people. Then none other than Miss Krista Caceres of the NAACP did hers on Sunday, bringing families together to let us know that we have a right and a voice, and our voice counts. And it was a successful march of peace these 2 days. It can be done if we put our minds to it. I just wanted to start off with that and get you started and get you rolling. Tell your neighbor, share this page with someone right now. Get on, share it, let them know there's some great guests coming on. And I do have some great guests. None other than the great Dr. Gregory Edwards from Allentown. He's going to come on and greet you and tell you a little bit about himself, senior pastor and founder of the Resurrection Life Community Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Dr. Gregory, come on, greet us here today, brother.
God bless you, Bishop Pierman. My name is Greg Edwards. I'm the founder and senior pastor of the Resurrected Life Community Church, United Church of Christ, president and CEO of our church's community development corporation called the Resurrected Community Development Corporation. I'm also director of Power Lehigh Valley, which is affiliated with the state of Pennsylvania's largest interfaith community organizing initiative. I was the first African-American in the Lehigh Valley to run for Congress, a graduate of Morehouse, Geneva College, Drew Theological Seminary, received my doctorate in public policy and transformational justice from the New Brunswick Theological Seminary. And I believe, as well as our guest, that we are living in a Rhema moment, and we've been called for such a time as this. So I want to thank you for the invitation to speak truth to power and to dismantle and, dare I say, destroy that demon of white supremacy and racism that exists within this unleavened land that we call these yet to be United States. So thank you for the invitation.
I'm glad you're on with us. And then my next special guest, a good friend, Dr. Liston Page Jr. All right, pastor of the Highway Church in Paterson, New Jersey. He's going to greet you. I'm so glad to have you on here. Pastor Page, talk to us this thing.
Hey, Dr. Pierman.
Yes.
Yes, man, this is a joy to be with you tonight. I mean, we've been friends for a long time, and it is my pleasure, it is my honor to serve you on tonight with Dr. Edwards. And so I'm just excited about what God is going to do for us in the future. I still believe that this shall be the greatest season of our entire lives. So in spite of what we see systemically going on in the land, we as the representatives of another kingdom, that is the kingdom of God, we are supposed to be that light in darkness, because we have been transplanted out of a kingdom of darkness and transplanted over into the kingdom of light. So I'm excited to be with you tonight and to have this most poignant conversation.
Well, I'm glad I got two strong brothers on here today. And let's just open up by talking about the things that have happened in reference to the marches that have taken place. And we know that the protests have been great, and there have been some riots that have taken place, and it kind of shook some things up. But I want to say that when I was growing up, they took me back a little bit when they went into the riots that took place in Newark in the 1960s. And I was just hoping that when it was getting to be to a place of overwhelmness, that we would remember, or someone would come out, and here I'm going to say, someone would come out with that history to say, we're not going to tear our communities up again. We're not going to leave our seniors where they can't go to the stores or collect their medicine, or take people away from their jobs in the community. We're not going to do that again. But somehow or another, in between the infiltration of some other folk coming in, it happened. But I want to hear what your feelings and what you have saw, what you want to address the people with, Dr. Edwards.
Sure. Thank you, Bishop Pierman. So I think one thing, that this is a very complex situation. And, when we're looking at things, there's a thing in ophthalmology called depth perception. In other words, how well are you able to see beyond your immediate eyesight? And we've got to have some depth perception. First of all, when we talk about, and you mentioned folks that are burning or looting, let me just say this. It's been reported statistically that many of the folks that are burning properties are not people of Black African heritage. In other words, many of the folks in some of these cities are people who've been assigned. It's been reported that they are white nationalists who are using the protest of our Black brothers and sisters as a way to incite further violence, and also concretize this imagery of the violent Black male or female. So some of the folks that are burning things down, that is not monolithic in their race. And that's been reported in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., and in Minneapolis and in Philadelphia, that the white nationalists have been dog whistled. In other words, they've been dog whistled by the president and other white nationalists, that this is an opportunity for them to further concretize this narrative of the criminal behavior of persons of Black African heritage. So, this about depth perception, we've got to peel the layer back. We know that there are Black folk, brown folk, and white folk that are in the streets that are peacefully protesting the ongoing deaths of our Black sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, due to the unchecked brutality of police officers across this nation. And what is being reported is that many folk who are white nationalists, who have an agenda other than ours, are using this as an opportunity to further, if you will, institutionalize a narrative of the criminality of Blackness. And so we want to be very careful in this moment. We want to be very careful as Christians, as church leaders, as Black brothers and sisters, in whom we are pointing the finger at in this moment, right? Dr. King, in that famous speech that's being quoted right now, said that a riot is the language of the unheard. And in the church, we have just recently celebrated this season of Pentecost. I believe that Pentecost has come to America in the form of the unheard tongues of those who have been made invisible and disposable.
That is so true. And to you, Dr. Page.
Well, I agree with Dr. Edwards as he so eloquently put it. I believe that this is a time where our nation has been polarized, not just by police brutality, but I think Dr. Edwards would agree that it is such a convoluted message being sent by white nationalists, by our president, and by those supporters of Dennis the Menace, that we're being lost. We're really being lost in smoke screens and mirrors. I think what we see is a misrepresentation of Black people who are justifiably angry. They're upset. And I believe that the vitriol that you see in the streets is not being portrayed by burning down buildings and setting on fire police cars and shooting policemen. I don't think that that is going to help the cause. And since any intelligent African American knows that's not going to further our cause, the wheat has now been sown in. The tares have come in amongst the wheat, and now because we normally judge things best based on optics, the optics appear to be more how can I say it, more devastating than they actually are to us as African American people who know we are not the ones who are behind it. But unfortunately, we all get labeled the same because this systemic evil, classism, sexism, egotism, these biases, this jaded mindset, this socialization, marginalized, disenfranchised people, all of those things are now coming to the surface. And I think African American people, Black and brown bodies, they're tired. They have come to the end of the rope and they are tired. And as Dr. Edwards again so eloquently put it, Dr. King was right. Our riot is nothing but the language of the unheard. People want to be heard. And let me interject this. When you have no, how can I say it? Where there is no expectation, there can be no disappointment. And I think that's where African American people are now. They have no expectation that America is going to treat us amicably. I believe they have no expectation that we're going to be treated fairly. So because there is no expectation, there is no disappointment. So they're taking things into their own hands. They're not going to place their hopes, their desires, their dreams for the future into a system that constantly keeps failing them. So I think what we see now is the consequence and not the cause. We're seeing the consequences of wicked. The wicked shall be turned into hell in every nation that forgets God. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. What we see is the initial signs of the eschatos, the end times, the end time. And I'm not talking about the Perusia. I'm talking about we're seeing the beginning of the end times. It can't be the Perusia because scriptures teach us that when Jesus Christ comes back, he'll be like a thief in the night. That's why everybody's running to church. That I know he ain't coming back now because everybody's consciousness is so heightened to some, I would call it pseudo spirituality. But we see the elements of eschatology, eschatological events. That's what we're seeing right now. And unfortunately, we're caught up in this vacuum of COVID-19, which is a pandemic. Now we have a cultural pandemic. We got a lot to deal with.
And that we do. And so as I was listening to both of you all come forth as strong, not only leaders, but strong Black males, which is good to see. I want to ask you the question, what do you think about the leadership that is taking place in America? And have they come forth with all the strength and power that they should have or could have done? Either one of you.
Well, I hear Bishop Page sucking his teeth, and I would suck my teeth as well. I mean, I think that there is a vacuum of leadership, and I think for multiple reasons. Let me just say that. And I think because of internalized oppression and the whole metaphor of crabs in the barrel, and because of the American notion of individualism, we've got people who want to be on the top of the barrel, but don't really care about the barrel itself. And so I think that we in the African American community or people of Black African heritage, we lack cohesion in part because we don't have good or effective leadership or leadership that is called for such a time as this. And you know, if you tell someone your price and they have your price tag and your cost, you know, I've got a saying, it's hard to be a prophet on the payroll. And so, you know, it's hard to speak truth to power when you are getting underwritten by that same power. No one is going to dismantle their own mortgage payment, their own car payment. So part of what we need to be talking about, not just in terms of the vacuum of leadership within the African American community, but is the vacuum of economic self-sufficiency, which allows us to speak truth to power and show up in ways which are not tied to predominantly white established institutions, so that we can show up in our authentic selves. I think many folks will not show up and will scratch where they don't itch, dance when there ain't no music, and laugh when ain't nothing funny, because they're on their payroll and their price has been made known. And so part of what we don't have, which is what we saw in the earlier part of the former century, was the civil rights institutions financially underwriting freedom fighters and financially underwriting predominantly Black institutions, which were not beholden to white establishment or the notion of white capitalism, whether that be the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, whether that be in prior years, the NAACP, whether that be our Black denominational churches that were in no way beholden to white economic powers. So I think the whole issue of leadership is inseparable from the issue of economics. We have far too prophets, PROPHETS, but we are thinking about the other prophets, PROFITS, because we lack economic self-sufficiency.
All right, let me hear what you got to say, Pastor Page.
Well, you know, again, because we are faith leaders that have a social consciousness, I think that foundationally, for me and Dr. Edwards, of course, we're always going to speak in a monolithic way, because we use the scriptures as the foundational base of all of our convictions. And he says something that was striking, very poignant, very powerful. And if we're listening, it can be extremely transformative. He talked about prophets on payroll. Wow, how powerful a narrative to paint when we look at the scriptures of the Older Testament in the book of First Kings, when you had an Israelite king named Ahab marry a Phoenician princess named Jezebel, right? In the book of Revelations, the book of the Apocalypse, we have the 7 churches of Asia Minor, all right? John on this Aegean Sea. And God rolls back his mind while he's in quarantine, he's in isolation, God opens up his mind and gives him deep insight to 7 distinct characteristics in 7 literal churches, right? Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. 7 churches that represent the 7 periods of church history. Well, Dr. Edwards said that we have prophets that are not speaking truth to power because they're on the payroll. Well, watch this. The 4th church, the church of Thyatira, John gets this message from the master, and the master said, tell the church of Thyatira, they hate this, they don't like that, they won't tolerate these things, but here's their problem. They have allowed the prophetess Jezebel to come into the temple and to speak out of her own resource. They've allowed this false prophetic display to be presented. And I'm mad at y'all for that, because you would rather hear what someone says that is manipulated by the money, by capitalism, by socialization. What do you mean, Bishop Page? Well, Dr. Edwards said, and I agree with him, that these prophets can't speak truth to power because they're on the payroll. Well, that's connected to Jezebel in this way. In that Older Testament narrative, remember, Ahab goes to the prophets, and the prophets that he goes to are the prophets that are employed under the employment of Jezebel. They're being paid by this wicked system to say to King Ahab what his flesh wants to hear. Guess who shows up? Elijah shows up. He ain't on the payroll. He's not convoluted. He's not trying to blend in. He stands on the outer perimeter saying, listen, what they saying to you is wrong. It's not gonna happen. So watch this. It mirrors the same prophetic voices that we see in Isaiah and in Jeremiah that told Israel, don't worry about 70 years of Babylonian captivity. It will never happen. It will never happen. And Jeremiah shows up and says, those prophets are lying to you. You all are about to get spanked by Nebuchadnezzar because of your insolence, because of your arrogance, because you won't do right by the poor, by the needy. In fact, you're doing worse than pagan nations. You've allowed all type of practices to come. So God's going to raise up a foreign king, a foreign power to spank you back in proper alignment. What we see today is Donald Trump as a type of, as a metaphor, a chastening rod against a nation who was built on the principles of what we call the 66 books of the Bible, the canon. But before it, how can I say it? After it was canonized at the Council of Carthage. And we see this as our constitution, that our morals hinge, our morals swing on the hinges of this Bible. We have seen a leader that is antithetical to everything that we say as a nation we believe in, but no one can speak truth to the power because they're being paid. They're being compensated. They're complicit. They have complied. They have conformed. And that's why powerful voices need to be raised up in this season that don't mind speaking truth to power.
And I'm a firm believer in that. I also believe also as we took that we talked about Pentecost Sunday, as you said earlier. And I believe that we've been empowered because it said that our sons and our daughters shall prophesy. These are our young people that have a voice, and they're supposed to be speaking life and truth to power. Our old men shall dream dreams. Our young men shall have visions. We're supposed to be able to carry that dream and help to improve the vision of the next one. And so when I looked out there at the people who were marching, I had a smile on my face in the midst of a sadness because I saw young people who had taken the bull by the horn, and they began to come forth as lights unto our nation and be counted and stood up and stood for what they knew to be right, although they may not have had all of the history right, which is our failure as adults to pass on to them. But the fact that they took a stand, because for so long we have not done anything and we have not promoted the history of what we know have happened in our past, that they could understand it even better, that even while they're marching, it's not that we're fed up and we've had enough, but what have you had enough of? Have you had enough of knowing that your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, your mom and your dad, if they lived through the times of the 60s and the civil rights, you're fed up with that? And are you fed up with the fact that all that they fought for has gone back into like a can almost, because that's what it looked like the president wants to do. He wants to take us back to the 1940s and 50s. All right, I got to come back to you, Dr. Edwards, because I know that there's something turning inside of you and I want to hear it. Yes, I do.
Well, let me just say that I think that either through benign neglect or malignant intent, the church has been complicit in this moment. And when I say the church is not monolithic, as Bishop Page lifted up. We have a responsibility. I'm thinking about Jeremiah, the first chapter, when the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah and says, you've been called to be able to pull up, pluck out, to destroy, pull down, and plant and rebuild. That our young people that you mentioned, our young people are waiting. The millennials are waiting, in the words of Howard Thurman, that Morehouse mystic, that theologian. They're waiting to see what the Black church has to say about those whose backs are up against the wall. And, with COVID-19, God has left the building. Jesus has left the building. Folks have to come up with a new way of being the church, right? Which is probably more biblical and more theological than ever before. But I think with COVID-19, and then with what's happening with the incredible level of police brutality and the outcry, is that we in the church, we can no longer fence walk our faith. We must call people to choose. I mean, literally, I know we don't like saying this. Jeremiah 24 says, choose you this day whom you shall serve. We got to choose, in the words of the hymnist, we got to choose whose side we're leaning on. And if we're leaning on the Lord's side, then we've got to be able to realize, or at least repent of the fact that we have worshiped a God that we really don't want to follow. That we have sung about a God that we really don't want to follow fully. I mean, the last chapter of the Gospel of John says, if you love me, Jesus says to Peter, feed my sheep. Part of feeding sheep is to be able to expose the lies. And the fact of the matter is, folks were outraged about Donald Trump, and I get their outrage. Donald Trump goes and he tear gassed the crowd. He goes in front of that Episcopalian church. He lifts up what looks like to be a Bible, and he used the churches as a background. Well, I'm going to tell you, that's not the first time that bad theology, a white man, and the Bible were used to basically denigrate and perpetuate injustice, right? The church has been used for years as a backdrop to perpetuate injustice. As a matter of fact, in 1555, the first ship leaving Africa coming to these shores was named Jesus. So part of what we have to expose in the church is the lie of white supremacy that has been clothed in the garments of the church. we've got to expose the lie on what real, authentic relationship with God really looks like. We got to expose the lie. Then we got to explain the truth of what it means to expand the reign of God through justice and equity. And then we got to definitely exercise. I didn't say exercise the demon of racism and white supremacy in the era that we are living in. I'm convinced. I'm convinced. Donald Trump is not America's sickness. Donald Trump is a symptom to a deeper sickness and pathology that has existed in America from its origin that we've never been truthful about exercising. We've never really told the truth of the founding of this nation built upon the denigration of persons of West African heritage who we enslaved, or the encampment of Japanese Americans, or the turning away of Jewish citizens, or the annihilation of the indigenous persons. In fact, violence is America's original language. And so, I look at people who are looking at this current scene. I'm not condoning, I'm not condemning what we're seeing in terms of the quote unquote riots and looting, but I'm saying that violence is America's original language. If we think that the Boston Tea Party was nice, that the Boston Tea Party was not about the overthrow of the taxes that were enacted by England onto America, we are fooling ourselves. And so part of what we have to do in the church, we've got to lean in and push. We've got to push people beyond America's deeply mythologized past. And if we don't do that, we get someone like the current occupant who is reliant on ignorant folk to wear a hat that says, "Make America Great Again." And so it's part of our job in the church, even though we come from all different walks of life. It's part of our job in the church to expose those lies, to expand the truth, and to expand the reign of God's justice and righteousness by speaking truth to power.
So my question would be then, do you feel that because we're not hearing that in our churches, that is why most of our young people and some of our men stay away from the church?
Oh, Lord have mercy. You meddling now. Now you meddling now, Bishop. You meddling now, Bishop. Me and Bishop Page are going to have a conversation because Bishop Page, I'm from New Jersey originally. As a matter of fact, one of the first sermons I preached was in Calvary Baptist Church in Patterson, New Jersey. So I used to run the streets of Patterson. I know Reverend Rowe very well. I can feel your heart. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jesus's biggest complaint was against the religious leaders of his day, who had whitewashed true, authentic relationship with God, who had married their religious practices with the state of Rome in order to economically exploit the poorest of the Jewish people. And we're not seeing too much far from that. This whole notion of Western American Christianity that is colluding with quote unquote a patriotism and a nationalism that wraps itself up in the flag, so much so that anybody that critiques America is seen to be an enemy of the state. The last time I checked, when I read my Bible, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and all of those prophets, part of their role was not to be a taillight, but to be a headlight, shining light in dark places, speaking truth to power, and making sure that there was equity and justice in the land, Micah 6:8. So I would agree with your statement, absolutely.
All right, Dr. Page.
Well, I totally agree, but I like to go back and just deal with the whole idea and ideology that Christianity, institutionalized Christianity, is a backdrop for bad theology. I think what a powerful statement, because I believe that this season of COVID-19, as we leave what you would consider a medical pandemic, now we're going into a cultural pandemic, is exposing frauds and fakes in the pulpit. I think that crisis causes real exegetical, hermeneutical, responsible preachers to explain the truth. I believe that if America's original language is violence, then we have to try to trace back and find out, when did the message of love become so whitewashed that violence becomes palatable and acceptable in our society. So I'm gonna dovetail back on Dr. Edwards, who I love. I'm gonna dovetail back on him and just say, when Judeo-Christianity, or Christianity in particular, but Judeo-Christianity, because Christianity is always birthed out of the cradle of Judaism. So when Christianity was hijacked through 5 watersheds, the watershed of Romanization, then the watershed of Europeanization, then the watershed of colonization, then the watershed of Westernization, then the watershed of Americanization. Now you have a Christianity that does not look like the original Christianity that came out of the cradle of Judaism. So now you have this Grecianized, Europeanized thought, much like during the intertestamental period when you had Alexander the Great, that hijacks the Jewish language of Hebrew, Aramaic, and he replaces it with the dominant language called Greek. So he tries to Grecianize that world. And when Jesus comes on the scene, we really don't even explain Jesus properly in his context, because Jesus practiced a pre-temple Judaism. After the first temple is destroyed, he's practicing really a second temple type Judaism that was filtered through a Greek language dominated by a Greco-Roman world. So when you look at the lenses of Christianity today and how America has tried to sell us this concept that even slavery is in the Bible, and how many of us, many academicians don't even consider Paul to be a viable option of what we would read in the New Testament, because it appears as though he is undergirding the construct of slavery, but it's through a misinterpretation of the scriptures and culture that has us where we are. So I think it goes all the way back to what Dr. Edwards said when he started talking about these prophets and speaking truth to power and being honest and being transparent. We got people out front that are obviously not trained, they're not educated, they lack, how can I say it, intellectual, intestinal fortitude, cognitively, they're retarded, they don't know. They do not properly know how to even articulate a thought. And watch this, we have the most powerful office in the world. We have someone leading the most powerful office of the free world. He has a floating ethics. He's having photo ops at an Episcopal church. We're in the middle of a civil uprising, and we don't even understand it's smoke screen and mirrors. He is the master of deflection. He's the master of it. And we keep falling into the trap. But this is a discussion that I think me and Dr. Edwards, we're going to have this discussion offline. We're going to talk about that. See, I want to get his even thoughts
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the whole concept of black on black crime. I mean, we all upset about police brutality. What about the Negro that's being brutal towards me? What about our own people taking each other's lives? I believe that we need to talk about it, but on a linear perspective. I don't think one size fits all. I think we should be talking about the whole ball of wax.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm so grateful tonight that I'm on a panel with somebody that's intelligent. Lord, I don't know what to do.
And let me say this, Bishop Page. Let me say this. There are some conversations that are for the living room and some conversations for the kitchen. So there's some conversations we can put on Facebook. Then there's other conversations where the family's got to go into the laundry room or the kitchen and say, well, let's come on, let's reason together, because we don't need to let everybody see. We don't need to let everybody see. But yeah, we need that in our community. We need that in our community. We need more of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
I was shouting when you were talking. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm loving the way both of y'all talking, but I want to do this because I know that Pastor Gregory, you gotta go take care of something else.
Yeah, tonight is the Pennsylvania primary, and I got to speak at another event. I hope everybody out there voted now. I hope y'all voted. Actually, in Pennsylvania, it's the primary, so come on now. We are standing on the shoulders of Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and Dr. King and Malcolm X, and we want to protest the march, but we've got to vote. We live in an imperfect nation, and we have the ability to hold folk accountable for those founding documents that talk about domestic tranquility, that talk about equality, liberty, and justice for all. So we got to vote. We got to vote. I know it's an imperfect democracy, but folk have died, literally died, marched, bled for the right to vote. So we got like 10 minutes left. You got to push Big Mama. You got to pull. You got to prod, encourage, cry, get in the car, shove. As long as you are in the line at 8 o'clock, get your mask on, get your gloves on. I hear what you're saying, but you got it. We got to vote, y'all. We got to vote, y'all. This is do or die. This is do or die. The sickness has come to other communities, and when they catch a cold, we catch pneumonia. When they get sick, we get cancer. I mean, this nation and this body politic is killing Black folk. It's killing us, y'all. It's killing us. So let us not think that civic engagement is antithetic to our ability to shout, sing, dance, and holler and hoop on Sunday, right? We've got to be theologically informed, but we've got to be politically engaged, you know, according to Esther, for such a time as this, y'all, for such a time as this. Please go out and vote. Sorry, Bishop, I just had to say that.
Hey, no. Listen, that's what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to put together a platform that we can get and encourage our people to get out and do what they need to do. And that's what this is all about. I want to say to you, Dr. Gregory, before you have to go, one of the things that I'm always moved by you've always have a strong voice and you're going to speak what it is that needs to be spoken. As that's why I'm glad I paired the two of you together, okay?
You're laughing because I know you and I've had some conversations. I said, I love Jesus, but I also like Peter. Let me just say that.
We got it. And so I want to say to you, when you listen today, and many of you are saying, oh, I thought I was going to hear more about this, but you got to understand, for the Black church, for the Black spirituality of who we are. I'm not even saying just the Black church. Our spirituality of who we are, to believe in our God, makes the difference in where we should be at. And if we have the right leaders before us, they can pour into our lives and help us to become even greater than we think we will be. And so I'm saying to you, when we talk about leaders and we saw young people that are out there, and I listen to some people speak and I listen to others who had to come and say, no, that's not what it's all about. It's time for us to come to our pulpits, come out of the pulpit, go into the pew, go into that home, go into that courtyard, wherever we can go at, and sit down and train our brothers and our sisters, because they're not the church of tomorrow. They're not the hope of tomorrow. They are the prophetic voices of our today. and they're rising quickly. And if we don't get out there and do what we need to do, we're going to have another thing that's going to happen, and they're not going to be prepared for it. They've done well to the best of their ability. That's why I can't judge them for things that they've done, because they've stood up to the best of their ability. They know that there's something going on. They feel the pressure. They're carrying the burden, but they don't understand what it is to have a burden lifted from the calling. The burden will lift after you can fulfill what you're doing, but the calling stays with you every day, every night. You go to bed with it, you wake up with it. Being black, you go to bed with it, you wake up with it. You just can't erase it out of your life. And therefore, as we find out what we need to do to better prepare our children and our grandchildren of a legacy that's very strong, rich and rooted in strength and power, we've got to do it. I wanted to say that because I want to give you the last words to say, Dr. Edwards, and then I'm going to go back to Dr. Page, but I want to give you that because I know you got to go. And I want to tell you, I appreciate everything that you've done and what you do for your community and surrounding areas.
Well, I want to thank you, Bishop Pierman, for this opportunity. And I want to also thank Bishop Page for his clarity and his insightful and precise knowledge of church history and also the text. You know, we are in a do or die moment. I'm not the oldest of persons. I'm not the youngest. I'm 50 years old. And I have to say, for the first time in my life, I praised the Lord and was thankful that the people who poured into me and loved me had gone on to glory, or resting with the ancestors, and not alive during this time period, because there's so much suffering and so much pain and so much confusion. And yet we are here for such a time as this. And I believe that we have to ask ourselves the question, specifically in the church, what does God require of us? What does God require of us? And when we answer that question, let us answer according to the full counsel of Scripture. Let us take into the account the life and the ministry of Jesus. Let us take into the account the life of the prophets. Let us take into account Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of us but to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God? Let us take into account Jeremiah 31 that says Rachel is weeping for her children and is inconsolable because of what she has lost. But I believe that we are living for such a time as this. And if the Lord were to come back, would he convict us because of the sin of silence, or what we would call an FTA, failure to appear? It's time for the church to become visible in places where we've been unseen, and make sure that the voices of the unheard are heard in this present moment. So God bless you, Bishop Pierman. God bless you, Bishop Page. Bishop Page, I'm going to be in touch with you, brother. You're going to come, you're going to preach for me virtually or in the church. Both of you are going to come actually and preach for me. But I want you to know I love you with my heart as a brother in Christ, praying for you, praying for your ministries. God be with you. God keep you. God sustain you. God bless you.
Bless you too, sir.
Thank you, Bishop.
God bless you.
Bishop Page, he said failure to appear. Now, I just want to hit this up a little bit. Failure to appear, failure to show up. I feel that has happened in our community a lot. I want to hear what you think about that.
Dr. Pierman, I think that this is a much sobering moment. And if we're honest, it's one of those moments where we really don't know what to do except trust God. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart and lean not to thy own understanding. In all our ways, acknowledge God and he will direct our path. I think that we are in an unparalleled, uncharted, unprecedented time where we've tried to do things the right way. And it appears as though the right way is not producing the proper results. And it almost becomes difficult to tell people to wait on the Lord, because everybody's faith is being challenged and being tested. But what I think about in these moments is the book of Job, which is a book full of imagery, metaphors, allegories, but it's a narrative that hinges and it keeps promoting throughout all of the chapters this whole notion of theodicy, evil and good coexisting together for the purpose of God. Evil and good coexisting for the purpose of God, and the resiliency that comes with overcoming evil with good, being patient, not charging God foolishly, relationship that God has with man, to the point that Job, after his friends Bildad, Eliphaz, Zophar, they show up and they give him something called the ministry of presence. They sit there for 7 days. They say nothing at all. But after they start talking, and after they start inquiring, and after they start conjecturing, it is all a conjecture that is limited in the scope of their understanding. And they start saying, Job, you must have done something wrong. And he gets down in his spirit and in his psyche to the point where he says, where is God? If I could find him, I would fill my mouth with argument. I would enter into query with God. I would give God a piece of my mind. All of a sudden, out of a whirlwind, here comes God. And God never addresses any of Job's questions. He comes with statements. He comes with rhetorical statements to Job that are easy to answer, so they can't be questions, because God never asks questions that he doesn't already have the answers for, because God is omniscient. So when God asks a question, it's not a question, it's a rhetorical statement that brings the person who has been asked the question the insight or the revelation to where they are in conjunction to God's inquiry. So God says, Job, where were you when I laid the foundation? Where were you when I put the stars in the firmament above the waters and the firmament under? He starts giving Job all of these rhetorical statements. So when you look at the book of Theodicy, it just simply says we cannot foolishly charge God, because we know in the end that all things still work together for our good. It takes a mixture of bad, evil, good, compromise in order to get us to our intended end, which was always in the mind of God. There's a Hebrew word called yasir. Yasir. When God created us, he created us in mind never to change. So in spite of our free moral agency, where we have the power to choose, the choices that we make, that God allows, ultimately, when we line back up with his will work out together for our good. So, these times, though as bitter and chaotic and troubling and frustrating as they may be, I have a feeling that everything is going to be all right.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, and I believe that also. And so although we've come to this about the close of everything, and we're about to close this down, but God is always going to be in the minds of the people, because if you pray unto him, he will answer you. Seek him while he yet may be found. My prayer today is that you really enjoyed this broadcast and that you learned something from it. Yeah. You said, well, it's a little bit different than what I thought. It was very powerful. We wanted you to know the power of what it is to come together and work as one. And when we looked around, we got two great, powerful men on here today, and they've done a wonderful job. And so I want to say to you, as you've heard from Dr. Liston Page Jr. and also Dr. Gregory Edwards. They came on here today with an open heart to serve you, and what a job they've done. I want to say to you, Dr. Liston Page, it has been my joy in having you on today. And I'm so glad you joined me because you have a very busy schedule. Thank you for taking the time to join us here on Coffee with the Bishop. Don't forget to join me on Thursday. That's right, Thursday at 12 noon for Coffee with the Bishop. And we're looking to have a great time and a word just for you. Have a blessed night on purpose.